Morning all. Round 11 yesterday saw some very interesting games. Let's have a look at the first game to have a look at. Peter's Vidler against Levon Aronian. Peter kicked off with d4, and we saw actually knight f6, c4, e6, and now Nimzo Indian defence, not avoiding it with knight f3. So Peter opting for knight c3. Bishop b4, and now an immediate a3. Sometimes this, I think in the past, was considered a little bit inferior to other approaches like f3 or e3. If white wants to play a3 immediately, it's losing a little bit more time, but it is forcibly strengthening the centre. So getting the bishop pair from black and strengthening in particular the d4 square. And actually the a2 square could actually be useful in some cases for rook a2 later. With a plan like this, I've seen Colin Crouch actually make use of the a2 square in a featured game once in Chess Monthly. So this isn't such a bad idea, this immediate a3. Levon plays c5, and now after e3, a very sharp move, queen a5. I guess it's all theory though. So bishop d2. This bishop looks a little bit miserable at the moment. Knight e4. And then we see bishop d3, and the knight gives itself up for that seemingly bad, useless bishop. But the bishop is strengthening the dark squares in white's position, so it's not all bad. Queen takes d2, and now we see d6, and now white plays f4, as though there's an interest in actually discouraging e5 later. You can imagine this binds here against black playing e5. So is quite useful. So we see knight d7, knight f3. So we have this bind, and also this f file, of course, could be useful if white's taking, and then maybe d5. So black might not be that keen on e5 here because of those reasons. Black actually plays now f5 himself. So that's very interesting. He's shutting down this diagonal. It could be tactically dangerous, I guess, if black castles without knight on f6. But okay, white plays now e4, and after taking, bishop takes e4, knight f6, bishop drops back to c2. Okay, so at the moment, white's got this kind of bind on e5. This bishop's a little bit of a problem behind e6. So bishop d7 was played here. Now white castles. Now c takes d4. Now if white plays c takes d4 in return, the queens could come off, and it doesn't really promise white too much, I would guess, because these pawns are vulnerable. c4 in particular on this c file. So white tries to goes for a trump card here. He plays actually queen takes d4, knowing, okay, the structure's damaged and wrecked over here. But he has got pressure. He's got a trump aspect to this position. Pressure on d6. And actually, it would appear as though Levon might consider queen b6, but then maybe just rook a d1. And then it's still a problem, surely, for d6. So it seems a slightly uncomfortable position, or maybe even just taking and rook d1. In fact, might be stronger. We'll check in the second pass, or queen c5. But Levon's choice is actually to castle, just giving up d6 here to get this c3 pawn in return. Okay, bishop d3. We still have a slight problem. Black still has a slight problem with the d7 bishop here. Rook a d8, rook a c1, and the queen's protecting a3 from there. Queen a5, and now not queen b4, knight e5 now, knowing that this bishop has to defend e6. Bishop drops back to c8 rather miserably at the moment. Queen b4, and it would be really nice to repair white's pawn structure if black took. So black played actually queen c7. And okay, Queen C7 has a tactical implication which I think most players wouldn't really consider too much, and this is about to be revealed. Up to C5. If you haven't seen this game, so Levon Aronian, known for being a really solid and often aggressive player with that solidity, he plays a very interesting move, and this could be a real shocker to those of you knowing Levon's style. I wonder if you can guess what Levon played in this position if I give you 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, I find it quite shocking, the move G5. Just on, of course, general principles, it looks crazy to weaken your king. This is what most players are often given general advice, generalization: don't move pawns around your king. You're creating weaknesses around your king. But the grandmasters are often, breaking the rules, if they're artificial rules, because they're seeing particularly unique aspects of positions which defy rules, and here it would seem that it is justified in many respects for the knight to be loose to undermine the knight, and black's also got a nice grip on d5 if you look at this position, so it's not entirely crazy. In fact, congratulations to Levon for playing in such a dynamic way and considering these possibilities. Even if the problem is if they're miscalculated, it's a little bit dangerous. Okay, now white has several options, which we need to check in the second pass. It's really sharpened up the position. White played a sensible looking move, c6. Now here, okay, this is like uncomfortable for black, but I believe there's a very precise move which would help justify the g5 concept in this position. The undermining of f4 can actually be contributed to if black played in this position knight d5, and we're going to look at this in detail in the second pass. But knight d5 is forking queen and the pawn, which is the protector of e5. Then we have like cb and for example, and the game continues because that's attacking the queen. It gets quite complicated, I think. But knight d5 unfortunately wasn't played. The move b5 I think is the howler that we'll see is proven to be the actual blunder, not g5. So I think this could be a common misconception about this game, that g5 was a terrible move, or the concept behind it. It's just the generalization not to move pawns around your king. In particular merits of the position, it could be justified. I guess it's kind of playing with fire. And now, because of b5 and not knight d5, unfortunately, this is now there's a powerful move. Well, there are powerful moves after b5 that white has at his disposal. It seems quite clever to offer b5 as well, but then maybe things like rook d5 if queen b5. We'll check that out in the second pass actually. But white sidestepped the b pawn here by playing queen e1. I mean, queen b2 is also an interesting move as well, but queen e1 is aiming just to simply exploit that g file, still holding up the knight. So it's quite a neat move. It's holding up the knight from being undermined, taking white, still protecting there, and it's making way for queen g3. Okay, so this is getting to be a little bit tricky. It might actually be quite bad now for black. Actually, simply after this move b5, this could be, in this moment, the game has been damaged for black here significantly, because this ominous threat of now queen g3 just simply exposing the weakness rather simply of g5. I mean, it makes it look like a beginner's move, but it wasn't. It really did have good reasons behind it. You know, we can, if we tie ourselves in these generalizations not to move pawns around the king, and then there's reinforcement that that's a bad idea because you are punished statistically. You can actually never go into top gear in chess. I think to go into the very top gear of chess, you really do need to like play the position and let go of the generalizations. It's much easier for computers to do, obviously, because they're calculating so much better than humans. But we're going to be also influenced by the punishment of breaking the artificial rules and generalizations, which most often, yeah, you want to keep your king safe and you don't want to do this sort of thing. And here, okay, it is pretty bad now. Rook d5, trying to keep a break on the f-pawn, but queen g3, visibly it's bad. Creating more weaknesses now. h6, fg is actually winning material now. So attacking the knight, threatening a discovered check. So queen takes e5, so it'd be able to take the queen off. But white's just won an important pawn, so exchanges off queens. G takes f. It's a miserable position. Clearly the bishop's blocked in. It's a disaster position at move 28. I was very shocked that this happened to Levon. So it's like a tactical blowout. I don't know why. I don't know why this happens. We're all human, and to human, you know, to err is human. To muck things up completely requires a computer. So that was an old poster I once saw. You know, because computers can do so much damage because they can do things so quickly and repetitively. They can really mess up things completely. But not in chess nowadays. These engines can play the scientific moves and get away with them. But humans, to play these scientifically accurate moves, you obviously need the exact follow-up. So if you don't get the right follow-up, you end up with egg on your face, so to speak. So this f pawn is really dangerous now. For example, bishop g6 might be threatened with f7. There's numerous threats here, really, but bishop g6 looks tempting. King f7 might be addressing bishop g6, just trying to keep a blockade. Rook f4. We see rook d8. The bishop goes to e4, keeping control of the f5 square against rook f5s. So white's trying to minimise black's play. And you'll notice rook d4, there's bishop g6 check here. So rook d4 is not possible to pin this rook. So we see rook d2, and white makes a square for his king, h4, among other things, holding up the g5 square against rook g5 as well. So a5, okay, black might be trying to create a pass pawn, but now we see rook c3, and this looks really dangerous, this idea of just sliding the rook for rook g7. Rook e2, we see now a very powerful tactic indeed. I wonder if you can guess it if I give you 10 seconds starting from now. The clue is there's a kind of weakness of the last move, that this rook's not in contact with d8 here, which is important for this to work. Well, it might have been powerful anyway. But here white plays bishop g6, and it's an unstoppable pawn actually if takes f7. It looks to be an unstoppable pawn. So king f8, and then we see rook d4. There might actually have been a stronger move, which we'll check in a second, past rook g3 here. But rook d4 is also clearly strong, menacing threat of rook d8, so forcing black to do something about rook d8, which is actually mating here. So rook d5, a couple of rooks come off. Rook c5, winning more material. So it's torture. It really is a disaster for black. So f7, b4, white takes and takes on d5, more material won. Yes, not pleasant. 2 pawns up with the threat of rook d8. King g7, rook d8 anyway. This pawn's lust to expand to become a queen. And Levon Aronian had to resign. Okay, on the surface of it, it looks crazy. But I think we're going to try and use the second pass to prove g5 is not at fault. It's the continuation. So let's go through this. And I think it takes guts to play such moves and to consider such moves. So, you know, great credit to both players. So knight takes d2, d6. We see white has a slight plus here, technically, it seems. At this depth, anyway. So e4. Okay. Has this all been played before? I assume it has all been played before. If we have a quick look. This position, mind you, the possibilities of chess are so enormous. no games found in my database. Where did it actually go off the rails, this game? This is the beauty of chess. There's only 38 games here after bishop d2. Knight e4 is the top move. 23 games. Romnisham is one of the top exponents. So knight e4, bishop d3, 16 games, top move. Pauper, top exponent. Black taking on d2, top move. Romnisham. White takes for the queen. I think that's the only. I think d6 is the most popular move here with 9 games. Knight c6, 6 games. Okay, so here the top moves are knight f3 and f4. f4 has been played before, so we've got a few games here that exist. 2 in 1940, believe it or not. 1 in 1950, and 1 in 1985. There's actually Stolberg Lizitsyn in 1940. That was a win for black. In 1950, there was a win for white. Borisenko against Kolsky. So interesting. In this position. Okay, in this position we see knight d7. The best player that has played this before is Lombardi. So there's a game Polgar against Lombardi, 1985, which ended up in a draw. Actually, let's just quickly veer off and have a look. It was a short draw. Let's have a look. So the queens came off there, and just out of interest, and it was a draw there. We're never going to see this game again, I think, otherwise. So Zueso Polgar 2430 against William Lombardi 2500. Okay. So there's a game stem. There's not too many games in this position, basically. So e4, our engine friend here is indicating a slight advantage for white, a nagging advantage. Now the decision here was interesting. For queen takes d4, that looks to be the engine preferred thing to keep the queens on. I don't think there's anything much for white on an exchange of queens. This sort of position, minimal advantage, and we've got these weaknesses to pick on. Surely that's not very ambitious for white. So if we go back, queen takes d4, and white holds an advantage, it seems here. Now if we go for queen b6, which I mentioned, actually just rook ad1 is quite good apparently. Black's under a bit of pressure. He's going to have to defend e7 with his king. We can gang up on this d pawn. That gets sacrificed. Black can double these pawns, making the pawn structure like grandma's teeth. But has black got enough? Probably. This is actually maybe okay, because this advantage is absolutely minimal. I mean, look at this. This looks like a horrendous structure. So maybe this is a worthwhile to think about queen b6. Now, if we just take on b6, well, isn't that giving black actually some play on the a file against a3? So we won't end up using this rook instead of the a1. And maybe this isn't a big deal either, losing the b6 pawn, because again, bishop c6 and black's got some play. It doesn't seem that bad. This sort of position, in fact, doesn't seem that bad. Okay, but anyway, In the game we saw castling, and now queen takes d6. Now with the queens on, white does enjoy more potential pressure, and king safety is with the queens on, king safety is often much more gigantic in proportion than with the queens off, clearly, than the variations we've seen. King safety wouldn't have been such a big issue like in this game. And so, yeah, you'd think you'd never play this g5 in a million years. Well, I propose to you that you'll never be in top gear in chess if you don't consider moves like g5, even if they seem crazy and breaking all the rules. Because if the rules are artificial, really the rule is to play the position in chess. That's what it comes down to. But to do that, you need the absolute accurate follow-up sometimes, because sometimes playing the best move in the position creates a huge demand on the follow-up to be absolutely deadly accurate. But you know, this is a gutsy game from black. In the press conference, Levon said he was ashamed Queen c7 had the idea of g5. What else is there apart from Queen c7 though? If taking here, it does repair white's pawn structure. White's enjoying a nagging advantage. Okay, it's I guess it's like lesser evil time. To be in this mindset of thinking about lesser evils, you need to kind of resign yourself that you're content with a draw. Actually, Levin was asked, actually, I think, was it the competitive situation that he felt he needed to play for a win, which might have influenced this, you know, controversial Queen c7 and g5. He actually said no. I mean, this sort of position is still better for white, though. This potentially is an issue. This bishop on c8, that pawn on e6 is sickly here, and white could enjoy torturing black and potentially winning a painful, you know, positional game here, with black getting squashed without too much counterplay. If we examine this, how much counterplay can black hope for here with this horrible pawn here, this bad bishop here, this bishop's, you know, dominating the position on e4. So this Queen c7, you know, it's actually recommended by the engine Queen c7, and here, okay, the engine's not coming up with g5, g6, but actually I think Peter Zvidler recommended g6, yes. So what is actually the idea of g6? Let's look at the variations actually. So g6, alright, what is white actually threatening? c6 is like a positional threat in any case. Rook fe1. So if we have g6, okay, let's go with g6. What is black threatening? Okay, maybe something like knight d7 without allowing queen e4. I guess it's blocking this diagonal, making knight d7 possible to undermine the knight like this. So this is a safer way of undermining the knight without allowing queen e4, which could be a nuisance. Because then, if g6 played then knight takes g6. Just to demonstrate that, I think, let's just demonstrate that. Try and give, well, knight d7 here, queen e4 is strong, yes. It sort of brings the queen back nicely, even if knight f6. And also, if g6 here, we can just play knight takes g6, surely. So that's very unpleasant. Queen e5 here attacking the queen, it's unpleasant. So, okay, so g6 is the preferred move, and it takes real guts to do this. But white's move here is not appropriate in inverted commas. It's not appropriate to this particular position. Although c6 was what white's original intention, playing it here might not be the most accurate. g3, queen e1 here, but playing c6 here does allow knight d5, and you look at this, and so this is slightly dubious, this c6, and knight d5 here, and we have some interesting possibilities. So let's take here, leaving the queen hanging there. Queen takes, And now, okay, so black's a pawn down. It's only double pawns, but knight f4, and this was seen in the press conference. Rook b1. Now, Peter Zvidler says he couldn't get to grips with this position to find anything for white. And it's actually quite easy to go horrifically wrong in this position. Some of the horrors, for example, say rook c3. Look at this back row issue. Rook takes, knight e2 check, mating. So it's not all bad for black, this position. There's dynamic opportunities here. g2's under fire as well. If rook d1, okay, maybe not taking on g2. That's not a good idea. Actually, there's something like there's other tactics here, which make use of the b7 bishop. So taking and okay. So, but here rook d5. I think this was seen in the press conference. This rook d5 here, finally undermining this knight in this position. And now, you know, black's even better here. Look at the evaluation. So you can't really say that g5 was a terrible move in its own right, especially when white continued with his kind of default pre-programmed plan of c6, which was actually then becomes slightly inappropriate, it seems, because this position is really quite dangerous. What can we do? We can't move this knight without losing d3. If we try and kick this knight, then knight h3 is looking really dangerous. In fact, why isn't there a useful discover check? Because the king's on h3. Okay, and that should be about equal. So this is not brilliant for white. So apparently the best move technically in this position is actually rook b1, just targeting the b7 bishop, offering d3 for a moment. Bishop moves back. h4, offering d3, you might ask, because the bishop's still a target tactically. So knight takes d3, we can take here, and then take here, and then play check. So rook b1 might be the way to play the position, but this certainly, I don't think Zvidler had this in mind, this stuff. I think he had in mind that this position was better, but you know, it is tricky, especially with this, you know, rook d3 tactic for knight e2 here all the time. So okay, so let's go back. So b5, and yeah, black's in dire straits now. Actually, queen e1 is, you know, there's queen b2 as well, which has numerous threats. So like fg, it's holding up the knight basically for fg5 to be a threat. But queen e1 does the same thing. It holds up the knight for fg5 again to be a threat, as well as queen g3. So rook d5, is that the best? It's a difficult position now. If we try queen g7, fg, queen g5, rook c3, it looks dangerous for a potential rook g3. It's miserable, isn't it? There is a tactic here, I guess. Nope. It's just better for white. It's just better for white. It's all coming down. Yeah. So the punishment of g5 here will contribute to players being extremely wary of even considering such moves. You are playing on thin ice if you're not a computer and you're playing such moves. It has to be said. But I think for the top gear of chess, I suspect, you know, sometimes you do have to play technically accurate moves. Although there's counter arguments that Magnus Carlsen has avoided in many of his wins the most technically advanced moves, which engines would suggest, and follow safer, simple chess continuations where there isn't such pressure on calculation accuracy. But here, you know, black was slightly worse in any case. There isn't a case of maintaining a tiny advantage and incrementing that safely. Black was slightly worse anyway, but has destroyed his position, it seems. Now it's really just gone here. this position. White missed a more technical opportunity actually here coming up. Bishop g6 very strong. Now rook d4 was chosen, which actually looks really good at depth 19, but I suspect rook g3 is also strong. Maybe it doesn't really matter. Again, this is a case where you've got the advantage. A win is a win, so even if we leave this and find rook g3, it doesn't matter. Rook d4 does the job. It exchanges a pair of rooks. Rook c5 again, it's a strong move. It maintains the advantage without any controversy of having to really calculate accurately. So okay, Paul Levon, okay, but very creative game. Let's go on to another game of the rounds, and what's happened to the engine view. If I add the kibitzer, did I manage to turn off the kibitzer there? Okay. Pardon me. I think that's okay. We can see two lines. Okay, Gristrip against Carlsen was an interesting game. So Gristrip playing white d4, knight f6, and we saw Groomfield. And after knight f3, bishop g7, I think Simon Williams, Ginger GM, has recommended this move as an anti-Groomfield system. I might have mentioned it in a video at some point on the channel. h4, it's surprising. So avoiding loads of theory. How many times has h4 actually been played? If we do a reference check. Bishop g5 is a very popular move. C takes d5, queen b3, third most popular, e3 fourth, bishop f4 fifth, g3, queen a4, h3, bishop d2, c5, b3, queen c2, knight f3 to e5. We've got h4 with 9 games. 9 games on my database with h4, and there aren't too many great exponents. The players playing white are usually under 2200. Although there was a game, nope, there are about 2200 players with white playing this. So it hasn't been seriously tested at this level of chess before. Magnus, I think, just thought c6 was a good idea. Can't go too badly wrong with c6. Just supporting d5. Bishop g5. And as I've mentioned in the previous videos, if you're going to give up the dark square bishop for a knight, often it's a light square strategy, which that's part of, like pressurizing d5, for example. So after castles, in fact, the bishop was given up. So this means, for example, h5 is more achievable, h7 might be a target. It looks visibly quite dangerous, potentially. So h5, it looks like a blitz game. It's funny that sometimes long games can look like blitz games, and sometimes even the blitz sacrifices look as though they're on, but it's only under really deep analysis to justify them. But here, it looks like something you'd want to play in a chess cube war zone. You want to mate the opponent as quickly as possible on the h file, taking on f6, h5. It's pretty nifty for other reasons, because there's potential pressure on d5 and queen b3s, and if black ever takes with fg, we've got queen b3, e4 stuff. So Magnus is probably wary about all this, and he plays bishop f5, so he can recapture actually with the bishop if needed. Actually, let's turn off engine view for a moment to get a bigger board. Just look at this intuitively. So e3, e6. I think if this battery didn't exist, knight h4 might actually also be something for black to consider. At the moment, black's controlling the h4 square. So can this bishop actually be harassed? It's like locked behind, its own pawns are locking it in there on f5. But white actually now takes and just exchanges it off. Okay, so potentially, but actually queen e2 to take is a mistake, as a gross generalization. So both sides are keeping the tension. Now, though, we see Magnus playing e5, which is slightly controversial because he's saddling himself potentially after some mass exchanges on e5 with a weakened d5 pawn, which will be difficult to kind of defend potentially. So actually we see the first exchange on g6, now some exchanges on e5, now d5, saddling Magnus with this isolated queen's pawn, and rook d1. It's difficult to actually defend the queen's pawn. Queen a5, and for a moment there's a technical defence here. Knight e5, bishop e5, rook d5. There's bishop c3 winning the rook, so you can't do this because of the bishop c3. If you wanted to do it, that is. So White here keeps the pressure on d5, and he doesn't want a castle. His rook's placed aggressively. He plays actually king f1, believe it or not. It's daring stuff, isn't it? I'll just expand that a bit. It's slightly daring chess here. King f1, but there's pressure on d5 here. Okay, rook ad8. I think technically if White wants d5, b4 could be part of that, but White plays instead knight d4, and he's getting a bit of short of time. And actually now knight b3, and we see a kind of repetition of attacking the queen. Now here Magnus, you know, he can't hold up d5 in the long run, so this isn't a brilliant position. He just plays queen c6, inviting a repetition. I know it's slightly a strange game. Maybe a slight disappointment for Magnus Carlsen fans that this happened. Let's just check. Maybe there's some alternatives to e5 that are worth technically looking at. But it's sort of unknown, unventured territory after h4, relatively unknown at this level. I mean, even I don't know, is there anything better than c6? Maybe taking on c4, possibly. Interesting. So we're in new territory, really. So taking on f6 immediately is actually suggested by the engineer as an idea. And then we see h5. What else apart from h5? e3. Well, h5 follows it in line with h4 anyway. h4, h5. e3, e6. Now White takes and plays bishop d3. Okay, so we see knight d7, queen e2. So instead of e5, well, there's other moves, surely, here. But what would be the kind of follow-up? If we'd played rook c8, maybe later taking and then c5 is on the cards. What is actually black threatening? Taking, and then maybe e5 in a sort of Slav method of taking and then e5 is often seen in the Slav, or just taking in queen e7, maybe for queen b4 later, or c5 later. But just avoiding, the isolated queen's pawn, I think, is the idea. In the Slav lines where black takes on c4 and plays e5, black's avoiding having a problem with the d pawn. Here, e5. Whoops. Pardon me. In this position, we see e5 leaves black with a problem with this d pawn. White takes on g6 first. It's not given as one of the greatest moves in the position e5. So slightly controversial from Magnus, it would seem. Rook d1, yeah, just simple and strong rook d1. Okay, actually, rook takes d5 is actually technically possible here. In this position, knight takes. Now, not taking. That would be bad because the bishop takes c3, but king f1. And we have here a small advantage for white. Maybe this is the sort of position Magnus wouldn't have minded because he cleared that d file, and this rook might be silly, and this might be the sort of thing which Magnus could win in the long run. Especially this position could be something unpleasant for white longer term. 2-1 pawn majority, or well, anyway. But in the game continuation, after rook d1, queen a5, white didn't go for that. White just wanted a blockade strategy, so he's content with a draw. He's short on time, and he's happy to repeat moves. Basically, he's starting to be happy to repeat moves. So in this situation, knight d4, and he can harass this queen because the queen's part of holding up the d5 pawn. So he just harasses the queen. Otherwise, black's dropping a pawn. If black tries queen c4, again, we can harass the queen. You know, taking here is just going to lose the d pawn, surely, long run. And this is murky territory. If black has to sacrifice that pawn, this is murky. Although this looks dynamic for a5 here, but this is taking too many risks, I would suspect. This kind of technical continuation, which the Indians found there. So Magnus is happy just to have a draw here with black. The d pawn is a liability. Okay, so let's go on to another game in the round. That's the Ivanchuk against Boris Gelfand. We see Grunfeld again, not with any h4 though this time. We see a solid bishop f4, and I think this is a heavily trodden theoretical path. I think Petrosian once beat Fischer in a similar line to this. It might not be the exact line. It rings bells anyway. So knight takes c3, b takes, queen takes a2. So black's on that d5 pawn. Vasily plays c6 here. We see knight c5, bishop e2. Black takes on d5, bishop f3, and black plays now queen c4, stopping white castling, and it seems to offer c takes, but then maybe knight d3 is the idea, or just bishop takes b7 because the knight's holding b7. I doubt. Sorry, knight d3 looks dangerous. Let's check that out before I say something silly here. But in the game, actually, they just repeated the position, bishop e2. They just repeated this position. Okay, so to avoid saying something I'll regret, what is actually going on here in this position? Let's turn on the engine here. Okay. Bishop f3. If the queen, all right, we saw queen c4. Now if c takes, what is black's idea? Well, the rook's on, so knight d3. I think we can just take. Yeah, we just take because we queen over there. So that's not possible. Yeah. So the idea of black is bishop takes b7 because the knight's holding up b7, and this kind of position apparently this is okay for black. This is very good for black. White's not doing at all well here, it seems. Okay. So a quiet draw. Now, actually, there was a fascinating variation in the interviews after. Let's see. Something was that another alternative? Queen f5. There's c takes b7 here. Queen f5. The queen's on pre there. Pardon me. No, I think after that, let's just go on to the next game. Here, I think I think actually there's something to do with e5 is an alternative for black, but d takes should be okay for white. So I mean, yeah, black played maybe the best move in the position, just taking on d5 here. Okay, let's move on. Okay, this is a very exciting game. Vladimir Kramnik against Rajabov. So this saw a King's Indian, d4 knight f6. Rajabov playing black plays the King's Indian defense. So we see g3, well, a King's Indian structure, c5, knight f3, without any d6. d6 is not needed here, just accelerate c5, put pressure on the dark squares. And so fianchetto kind of variation, accelerated without d6. I think Dembo has written a book about this, King's Indians without d6. So here, knight c3, queen c7. So immediate pressure on c4. That's an advantage. Black's very energetic here, in fact, in relation to c4, because white protects c4 now with b3, and now they're very energetic, d5 in one go. You can imagine, you know, there's some advantages in not playing d6. It can make a big difference to the positions. Okay, so this d5, well, this is all theory though. Knight db5, bishop d2, queen d8, and the castle's a6, knight goes back, and so there's potential ideas to get the knight back, you know, to control the d5 square here, like in a kind of Sicilian Sveshnikov plan. So knight c2, knight c6, knight e3. So white's eyeing that d5. Now apparently the theory of this position is, believe it or not, to play the move queen d4 here. The theory would suggest that this should be mostly harmless, in elite terms, mostly harmless, this position, if queen d4. But Rajabov, I think he struggled to remember the theory. He played actually queen d7, and white should have a comfortable game now. Vladimir took on f5 and played rook b1, and not for the reason you might think of taking the b7 pawn. I think that was very far from his mind actually. It does just get away from the sensitive diagonal, and it supports some other ideas. Rook a d8, queen c1. Definitely not to take the pawn here. It offers a lot of pressure for black, and immediate, you know, threats like knight a5 on c4. So not taking on b7 is important for Vladimir. His main goal, and he's often said this every few sentences, he says, no, too much counterplay, I didn't want the counterplay. And okay, that's often in his post-game conferences, he'll often say about counterplay. So he's not, you know, into grabbing pawns and offering black ferocious counterplay here. C pawn is a slight weakness of white's position. Pardon me. And it's attacked here with queen e6. Now, actually, the move rook e1 is arrived at, which you might think is a strange move. Why isn't c4 on? Well, in this position, if c4 is taken, and now we do take on b7 in this position, I know this might conflict with what was earlier said, but here there's no conflict because there's less counterplay than before, at least in Kramnik's view. That's why in this particular position there's less counterplay than before. Taking on b7 is of course getting the pawn back and undermining the diagonal further. This bishop's got a nice view on that diagonal. So we see knight e5. Okay. And now bishop f4. Attacking the knight. The knight's protected. And now a move which is definitely trying to stop that counterplay a lot. This move h3, just to rule out these knight g4 possibilities. White enjoys a pleasant position here at the moment. We see knight c4, and now e4 really marks out that d5 square for use here, for knight d5 potentially. Knight e5, I know it seems odd play, but as though the knight had provoked weakness, now threatening knight d3, but Vladimir snaps it off now, and now plays knight d5. So of course it will be absolutely wonderful to take here and have pressure on e7. Black's not going to do that. Rook f e8, the pawn needs to be defended. Knight b4, threatening to fork knight c6, to fork these guys. Rook d7, and we see knight c6 here, attacking the queen. Queen goes to e6, and it looks as though the knight's vulnerable actually, potentially, not in this exact position coming up. Let's see, so it's white's move. Rook b6 is played. And it looks potentially, can the knight be pinned? Is the knight a big problem here? This is definitely something for the second pass. This position here is now very, very technical, and white was, I think Vladimir is worried about losing his knight to various pins. Okay, but here on move 28, Black actually is short on time. White psychologically had won the opening phase because Black hadn't played this like equalising move, which I pointed out earlier, this early queen d4, and you know, the a6 pawn is under fire here. White's just going to be winning material if nothing else with rook a6, and here Rajabov saw no danger in taking on a2. And I actually think this is now one of the more remarkable positions of the tournament, because we see a remarkable forcing sequence initiated in this position. Okay, the first move in the sequence is to attack the knight, and the knight hasn't got too many squares at all. If knight h5, then we have g4, and where is the knight going? It starts to get uncomfortable. You can't even counter-attack the rook. The knight's covering a5. You can't counter-attack any loose pieces here. So the knight's forced to go to d5. And there's a sniff of forcing combination stuff here. If we use that docking computer concept that I've mentioned on this channel, even outrageous forcing moves need to be examined because they give you insights into tactical vulnerabilities. Now here, if we looked at outrageous forcing moves, we might consider bishop d5, knight e7, even if it's totally losing, just to be aware of knight e7, rook b2, rook a6, and there's not too many others. Maybe queen g5 sort of forcing on e7. But here, okay, one of the forcing moves now is used, and it's actually rook b2. Now the queen actually hasn't got that many squares in this position, because if for example queen a3, I'm going to show you this now, not in the second pass. Can you see what white can play in this position if I give you 10 seconds starting from now? White has, unfortunately, rook b8, attacking the queen, attacking e8. So that'll be winning material. End of game. So the queen is forced to go to a4. It's like the only move, queen a4. And now there's another forcing move, which forcing moves actually let you let go of all the artificial rules of chess, because normally you wouldn't want to like lose your bishop here for fear of weakening the light squares. You wouldn't treat that lightly. But if there's a definite forcing move continuation, then these generalizations don't hold too much water. So can you see what white played in this position? Yeah. I think it's remarkable myself. The forcing move continuation is quite remarkable here. If I give you 10 seconds here, can you spot what Vladimir Kramnik played? Okay, bishop takes d5. He did give up this bishop. Has he gone crazy? Is he not weakening his king? Rook takes d5. Can you see now the forcing move used in this position? Okay, now give yourself minus 1,000 points if you played knight takes e7, because black's eyeing e8 here. You can't play this knight e7 even if you had the idea of the back row here, because black's controlling e8. Otherwise bishop f8, rook b8 might be good. No, the queen is put back forcibly on a2 here. And now we see knight takes e7 and the back row is exposed, forking king rook. If rook takes, I believe simply check, forces bishop f8, and then we have rook b8. Very unpleasant. I hope that's a continuation anyway. So we'll do a check. But in the game, black played king h8, losing the exchange and the game. That's curtains. That's the end of the game, basically. Losing the exchange, and that's at this level it's over. We see queen c4, and actually black speeding things up with bishop takes e5, going into this horrendous pin. So king f1, avoiding a little trap, I suppose. f4 is bishop d4, check, losing the rook. Well, it's not even. This is not even losing king f1 here. But no, even stronger than that. Just king f1 is played. Idea of f4, and black resigned. It's not been Rajabov's finest tournaments. He's lost about 5 games now, and he's supposed to be he's ranked 4 in the world, 2793. But chess is such an astronomically infinite game. You know, I don't know. Even if you become a super grandmaster, you can still be destroyed with, especially forcing sequences, as this game demonstrates. But let's go back to the theoretical point. Is this actually this queen d4? If we go back to what was supposedly theory, no, it's earlier. Okay, let's go back here to this queen d4. In this position, if we did a reference check here, how many people have actually played this queen d4, this particular position? There's only 2 games found on my database here. Wocky from Star Wars against Chandler in 1988 saw queen d4. So how did that game go? So black didn't mind this knight f5, and he gets a nice peg on e4, and we saw this. Sorry, I've got this all wrong. This is Boris Gelfand against Ivan Sokolov. Pardon me. Queen d4. I don't know what I was looking at before. The names have changed. No, these are two really high level games. Gelfand against Sokolov, 1996. So Sokolov had played Queen d4 here. Sorry, Boris Gelfand against Ivan Sokolov, 2665 playing black. Gelfand was 2700. So two very, very important games. Queen d4. And just to quickly show you the game. Skimming through the game, but Boris kind of eventually he won this game at move 71. So that was in the Hugevens Weekhandsee 1996. Then there's another very, very important game. So there's only two games here in my database for this Queen d4. Aronian against Nataf in 2004. Against Igor Alexandra Nataf, who was 2565 at the time. Levon Aronian was 2675. We see Queen d4. And this game was eventually a draw. So this was drawn eventually at move 57, this particular game. So Aronian against Nataf in 2004. And that was an Armenia versus France match. So Queen d4 has been seen in two high-level games. So in this game, okay, Rajbov seemed to not be aware of these two games. He plays Queen d7. What is the engine view separate from those two stem games indicate? Doesn't actually mention Queen d4. Oh, it does. Queen d4, even at this depth, 16. Queen d4. Offering. It seems a bit odd to offer knight takes f5. Perhaps you're doubling pawns, but it's justified. It's like a peg on e4. So we see Queen d7, and here, even though f5 is without the double pawns, it's kind of White's light square control I suspect is stronger here. Black's got no real grip on e4. This bishop's seeing that nice, beautiful diagonal. And technically the engine likes rook b7 here, regardless of knight a5. I think they had a look at this in the post-game interview. I think they were looking at Queen c5 was recommended by Rajmov. But here knight d5, it gets really quite messy. Queen c2, White should end up better. Queen b7, Queen e8, they look both ridiculous. This is ridiculous for this pin, and this is ridiculous putting the queen on. What about Queen b8? White's enjoying the bishop pair, and the centre's totally open, so I think this favours the bishop pair. In fact, White's got a +1, a very big advantage here, it seems, in this position, and this e4 gives White more central grip. White's dominating the boards in this position. So maybe taking on b7 is okay, but we see Queen c1, Queen e6, Rook e1, now Queen takes c4, now Rook takes b7, Knight e5 here. Is it to be preferred to play Knight a5? What's the advantage of Knight a5? Difficult to tell really. Seems about equal now. So anyway, so in the game we saw Knight e5, Bishop f4. Actually this looks to be a little bit of a blunder actually, Knight e5, Knight a5 to be preferred. So Knight e5 in the game, Bishop f4, which I think Vladimir really likes, playing Bishop f4. Queen goes back, and just this h3 move now. Okay, h3, Knight c4, e4, knight e5, that's taken off, knight d5. Yeah, white enjoys a small advantage, it seems. Knight b4 might not have been actually... Is that one of the better moves? Okay, knight b4, knight c6. And it's like setting a little trap. Apparently a better move than rook b6 is actually rook b3, just shielding the a2 pawn, and it also means potentially e5 and rook c3. So for example, rook c7, we can play rook c3, and there's no real problem with the knight. This is kind of a little bit risky, this rook b6. So apparently black can equalise dead equal with rook c7. This is the engine move recommended here, and the move that was mentioned in the post game interview. Quite a detailed discussion, that very technical, fast, detailed discussion. But rook c7 came up, and this does offer black. I believe this is the way for black to go. Okay, so knight d7, this is a nasty pin. In fact, why doesn't knight e7 work? You might be asking. Let's have a quick look at this. Oh, because of taking here. Yeah, this is okay for black. So here, knight d7, e5. Try and rescue the knight situation. Keep it protected. Knight e5. And yeah, this knight's just vulnerable here. If we try and move like queen c5, well, as knight f3 check, this rook's hanging. So this pin could have been quite unpleasant. This position looks as though it's absolutely dead equal with its opposite colour bishops as well. So it's a shame, but you know, this rook b6, yeah, rook c7. What is actually? It looks problematic for the knight on c6. So the threat here, black is actually threatening knight e5, just massively increasing the pressure on the pin and blocking the bishop from e5. So knight e5 is one of the key threats, or rook ec8. Okay, which makes it quite important for white to play e5 here. In fact, how many other moves are there apart from e5? This is virtually forced in this position. Okay, if white didn't want the a pawn, let's say white doesn't go for the a pawn. Let's play e5 now instead. Knight d5, bishop d5, queen c2, let's go like this. Again, you know, look at this position, it's okay, or even just moving the king here away from this knight e7 tactic should be okay. So I think the pin's a problem. Rook b3 would have addressed the pin, but we see Vladimir playing rook b6, leaving this kind of pin celebration episode. It was theoretically possible, it seems, to celebrate this pin with rook c7 against white's queen, but it wasn't played. We see instead this move, queen takes a2, and now we have a hyper jumping space through these forcing move sequences to get a completely lost position. The exchange down, completely lost position. I like this reverberation of the rook using the queen. Go away from e8 now, so I can play knight takes e7, check. And if takes here, I think just check, as I mentioned. I hope rook b8 is crushing. It's mating. King g7, queen takes is mate. So yeah, strange game, isn't it? Chess, strange. King f1 is actually one of the strongest moves here. By the way. Okay. In fact, is white actually he's winning more material with, if say rook e6, rook c e4, threat f4, or we'll just take it. So if f6, just f4, it's easy anyway after king f1. So I hope you enjoyed the round overview. Quite a lot of detail in more interesting games, and not so much in the draws, which I hope you agree with. So comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.